Hey there, welcome to this episode of the Cutting Room Floor. This is a segment where we get to go a little bit deeper into a recent message here from Sunny Slope Church, or we get to chase a rabbit trail. We get to go and follow something that maybe is not primary to the text, but it's an interesting detour. And today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're gonna chase a rabbit trail here. We're going to go to a place that I think this is not really the main focus of Leviticus chapter 25, but it's one of these assumptions, or it's one of these ideas that's kind of baked into the passage, and so it has some relevance. I think it has some relevance for us today. So, in Leviticus chapter 25, we looked at Israel's legal code. We looked at the laws that were on the books for the ancient Israelites that pertain to property ownership, and what happens if you have to sell your property outside the family. How can you get it back, and what is the role of a redeemer in all of that? Now, one of those assumptions that's baked into this legal code has to do with the importance of family. Like God structured society such that family had to really work together in order to preserve the family property. And so in Leviticus chapter 25, if your family, if you became poor and you had to sell your land in order to essentially put food on the table, then what God required was that the whole family, the whole extended family, come together and work together in order to preserve the family property, but also to care for the person who was impoverished. And so what you see in Israelite society, what you see in early Israelite society, is that the extended family formed this safety and security network. Easy to forget that they, of course, didn't have like Social Security back then. They didn't have social safety nets and so on. And so you really were really reliant on family. Family is what preserved and maintained the well-being of society. And I think that reflects something of the heart and of the character of God himself. It tells us something a little bit about how God structures and organizes society. He makes the family, including the extended family, one of the building blocks of a stable and functional society. Now, I think it's important to note that it's, even in the Bible times, we can see the way that family can become an idol. Like you can sort of idealize what a family is supposed to look like in terms of, how many, having children, and then if you don't have children, you can be marginalized. And today we can sort of treat, and I think we have to really guard against this. We can treat the family as if it's like the be all and end all of human existence, and we can forget that there may be people not called into families, and there may be, we can sort of focus so much on families that we forget about single people, or we forget about families with no children, and so on. And so that's not part of God's design, right? The nuclear family, as we understand it, is not sort of the be all and end all of human existence, but it does tell us that that God uses family to create stability and structure and safety in a society. As I said, we've got to be careful not to be hard on those who don't live up to the ideal. We've got to be careful not to be harsh with people whose families are broken or hurting. But family is really important, and I believe that that's even true today. I believe that continues even today. One of the things that we've seen in the last 70 years or so is the breakdown. Maybe it's more like 50 years, 50 or 60 years, is the breakdown in American culture of the stable, structured family life. Now, what's interesting is that the greatest single predictor of juvenile delinquency and of violent crime later in life, the greatest predictor of that is actually not race, it's not economic level, it's actually whether or not you're part of a stable and structured family life. So and that's one of the things that has been a foundational and critical change in our culture, and that is arguably, I think you can make a very strong argument, and I think the data supports this, that is one of the major causes of social instability today. It's this, we've gotten away from the stability of the family structure. So here's a little bit of statistics to back that up. So in 1968, 85% of children lived with both parents. So that's 85% of all children were living in a home where they had mom or dad at home, where they had mom and dad in the home. Now, that does not necessarily mean they were married, but it does mean that there was a mother and father in the home. So 85%. Now, by the time you get to about now, I think 2020 was the last, with the last census, that number has gone down to 70%. So only 70% live with both parents in the home. Now, again, that includes married and unmarried parents, but it's dropped from 85% to 70%. Now that might not seem like a huge drop, but it means that almost that more than 2/3 of children means that almost 1/3 of children are living in a home with only one or even no parents in it. And that has all kinds of adverse outcomes. Like that is a predictor of all. And now notice, it's not a cause, but it's a predictor, and there's difference behind that, but it's a predictor of things like attachment issues, like the ability to form and maintain secure and stable, healthy relationships with other people. So think about what that means long term for future generations to maintain stable and secure marriages, families, right? So if you've got insecure attachment now, because these children are growing up in that, and that the number of children growing up in that environment is only increasing, that's only going to snowball 20, 30 years from now. Think about things like it's a predictor of like being bullied or bullying, one or the other. It can be both. It can increase both instances of that. It's a predictor of abuse, pardon me, not a predictor. There's a higher risk of abuse. There's much higher risk of like delinquency, and that turns in over time into violent crime, robberies, assault, rape, murder, and so on. Statistically, a much higher proportion of people in families raised by single parents, you're statistically much more likely to go down that road. Things like gang involvement or poverty, school performance declines, all of those things are statistically proven adverse outcomes for children that are high. I should say it this way: higher rates of those things are demonstrable in families where there is only one parent in the home. Now, this challenges, I'm going to put something up on the screen, this challenges what is a dominant narrative in our culture today, and that is that when you look at things like crime, and when you look at violence and so on, we are often told that this is because of racial bias, either by the police or by social structures as a whole. But very few people actually talk or acknowledge about the family component in all of this. So if you look at this chart, what this chart actually shows, it shows the living arrangements of families of children in single parent homes. So in a white family, 75% of children of white children are from a family with both parents in the home. 3.1%, that's where the parents are both there, but they're not married. 13% mother only. 4.7% of white children live with only their father, and 3.2% of children live with no parent in the home at all. Now, if you look at, and by the way, the Asian community, and this is actually not that surprising given Asian cultural values, the emphasis on family and stability and so on, it's the highest number, it's the highest percentage of children who live with both parents in their home. Asian, 87%. Actually, it's more like 89% if you include the 1.6% of children that are that grow up in a home where the parents are there, even if they're not married. So that's 89% of children in Asian homes grow up with both parents in the home. That's a huge number. That's larger than any other racial or ethnic background. Now, when you look at the African American community, this is what's really concerning. The African American community, it's something like 42% of children in African American communities. Only 42% grow up with both parents in the home. And it's like something like 46% here. 46% of children from an African American background grew up with only one parent in the home. That's a concerning number, and that is a predictor of adverse outcomes. Now, there's lots of reasons, and I'm not qualified to assess the reasons why it's higher there than for other racial groups, but I want to suggest that at the very least that challenges a dominant narrative in our culture that says it's higher rates of crime among African Americans is purely due to systemic racism or something of that sort. I'm not denying that exists. Please understand, I'm not saying that there's not racial bias. Of course there is, but I think this presents at least a challenge, and it presents another way of looking at this that maybe is worth greater consideration. God intends the family structure to work together, and that's not just immediate family, but that's extended family. And I would say that in light of the gospel, that includes the Christian community. And so the Christian community says we have a responsibility to the broader community, to the broader culture in which we are part, to make up the gaps, as it were, to do what we can, especially if you're someone that's concerned about what happens in our society. It's easy to point the finger and easy to criticize, but one of the things that you can do is then step into that gap where there's an absence of parental figures, because statistics also show that mentor type figures, even if it's not immediate family, can actually mitigate those adverse actions. So I would encourage you, first of all, I'll leave you with a couple things. First of all, for those who are inclined to just boil all social problems down purely to racial or systemic bias, I would really encourage you to look at the data on that and to consider that there's perhaps a different way of looking at the data. There's other things at work, and I would suggest that there's a good probability that the breakdown of the family structure has much more to do with adverse outcomes. That's number one. Number two, I would say, to those of you who are concerned, to those of you who look at the world around and you feel discouraged about it, number one, don't idolize the family. Don't say, well, my family is all put together and so it's good and healthy, and I'll look at all those other people who don't have their stuff together. Ask yourself what you can do to step into that gap. What can you do to be a mentor? What can you do to be a casa, to volunteer? Don't just find the problem and criticize it, but find something that you can do to be a positive example, because that too, that's the Christian community at work. That's the Christian community being the true family of God. Thanks for watching. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the cutting room floor.